Okay, is everybody able to see the screen?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So few days back, I took the topic on hypothalamus. That was the first part of the hypothalamus. So I was discussing with the functions of hypothalamus. So this will be the second class on the same topic. So straight away, we will go to the functions of the hypothalamus. So I'll just once again brief the functions of the hypothalamus. First will be the control in the food intake. I also explained the hypotheses which are involved in the control of food intake, that is the glucostatic, lipostatic, gut peptide and thermostatic hypothesis. The other functions which I will be discussing in the today's class will be regulation of water balance, regulation of body temperature, controlling the anterior pituitary gland, controlling the posterior pituitary gland, regulating the autonomic functions, and control of sleep and wakefulness cycle, control of circadian rhythm, control of behavior, and lastly, the integrated control of the cardiovascular system. These are the other functions which I will be discussing today. How the hypothalamus controls the food intake, I already explained in the last class. That is, the lateral hypothalamic area is mainly associated with hunger. Ventromedial nuclei is mainly associated with the satiety. So it is called satiety center. So coming to the second function after food intake, the second function of hypothalamus is it has got a role in regulation of water balance. There are osmo receptors which are present in the lateral preoptic area of the hypothalamus. They respond to changes in the osmolarity, especially the ECF osmolarity. Whenever the solute concentration is high and the fluid concentration falls, this area responds. The osmoreceptor senses the changes in concentration in the ECF. So hemoconcentration, that is more the cells and less the plasma. So what will happen is increased production of antidiuretic hormone. Since the ECF volume will be less, antidiuretic hormone will start produced more. So which also stimulates the thirst center. So this is how the osmoreceptors function. On the other hand, when there is hemodilution, less of cells and more of fluid, that is more the ECF volume, there will be decreased production of ADH, mainly from the lateral preoptic area where the osmoreceptors are present. So regulation, the hypothalamus mainly regulates our body water in two different ways. One is by creating the sensation of thirst, which makes the person drink water. So you will get the sensation of thirst. Second is by controlling the excretion of water in the urine. So these are the two mechanisms how the hypothalamus will regulate our body water. First mechanism, by creating the thirst sensation which makes a person to drink more water. What they have found out is there is one thirst center which is mainly present in the lateral hypothalamus. What happens is when the fluid electrolytes in either the thirst center or the surrounding areas, when it becomes too concentrated, that is more of electrolytes will be there, less of water, the person develops an intense desire to drink water. So that means the thirst center will be stimulated. So the person will search out for the nearest source of water and drink enough water so that the electrolyte concentration of the thirst center will come back to normal and thirst center is no more stimulated. So this is the mechanism how the hypothalamus, one mechanism how the hypothalamus regulates the water balance through the thirst center, which is mainly present in the lateral hypothalamus. So one more mechanism I told you how the hypothalamus regulates water balance is by controlling the excretion of water in the urine. This function is mainly has got to do with the supraoptic nuclei. The supraoptic nuclei of hypothalamus is mainly concerned with the renal excretion of water. So what happens when body fluids become too concentrated? Mainly the ECF volume is too concentrated. The neurons of these areas, mainly the supraoptic area, will become stimulated. Nerve fibers from these supraoptic nuclei, they actually project downwards through infundibulum of hypothalamus to the posterior pituitary gland, that is hypothalamo-hypophyseal tract. Then these nerve endings from supraoptic nuclei, they secrete an hormone called antidiuretic hormone. The other name is vasopressin. So from supraoptic nuclei, where they are secreted, it is ultimately stored in the posterior pituitary gland, antidiuretic hormone. So what happens? This ADH is then absorbed into the blood and it is transported all the way to the kidneys, where it acts on the kidneys. So ADH mainly acts on the distal collecting tubules as well as the collecting ducts of the nephron. And the main function of antidiuretic hormone is, you all know, increased reabsorption of water. This type of water reabsorption is called facultative water reabsorption by mainly acting on the DCT and collecting ducts. So what happens when it acts? This decreases water loss in the urine but allows continuous excretion of electrolytes. So what happens is the osmolarity of ECF will start becoming lesser and lesser because the water content is going on increasing, whereas the electrolyte content is going on decreasing. So these are the two mechanisms how the hypothalamus regulates water intake. So each of these functions of hypothalamus, it can be food intake or water intake or body temperature. Each of these are very important and can be asked individually for 5 marks. Coming to the third function, after food intake and water balance, third function of hypothalamus is hypothalamic control of endocrine secretion by the anterior pituitary gland. So you all know the hormones of the anterior pituitary gland: growth hormone, thyroid stimulating hormone, adrenocorticotropic hormone, FSH, LH, all those anterior pituitary hormones are there. So what hypothalamus will do? It will control the secretion and release of these hormones from the anterior pituitary. How it will do? It will secrete something called releasing hormones and release inhibiting hormones via hypothalamo-hypophyseal portal system. So I will give some of the examples of hormones produced by the hypothalamus, which controls the secretion and release of hormones from the anterior pituitary. First is GRH, growth hormone releasing hormone. You can also write it as GHRH. One more is GHIH, growth hormone inhibiting hormone. Growth hormone releasing hormone, they will act on the anterior pituitary so that more of growth hormone is secreted from the anterior pituitary. On the other hand, GHIH, growth hormone inhibiting hormone, other name is called somatostatin. It will act on the anterior pituitary and decrease the production of growth hormone. Same way, prolactin releasing hormone, prolactin inhibiting hormone. PRF, prolactin releasing factor, prolactin inhibiting factor. They will act on the anterior pituitary and control the release of prolactin hormone. Same way for the thyroid hormone, there is thyrotropin releasing hormone, which will act on anterior pituitary and cause release of TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone. Next one is corticotropin releasing hormone, acts on the anterior pituitary gland and secretes ACTH, adrenocorticotropic hormone, which ultimately acts on the adrenal gland. Last one is gonadotropin releasing hormone, GnRH. It will act on the anterior pituitary and cause release of FSH and LH. So this is how hypothalamus controls the secretion and release of hormones from the anterior pituitary. So for each of the hormone in the anterior pituitary, there is one releasing hormone and inhibiting hormone in the hypothalamus, which controls the release. So stimulation of certain areas in hypothalamus will cause anterior pituitary to secrete endocrine hormones. What they have found is anterior pituitary gland receives its blood supply mainly from blood that first flows through the lower part of hypothalamus and then through the anterior pituitary vascular sinus. So this releasing hormone and inhibiting hormones will reach from the lower part of hypothalamus to the anterior pituitary through this route. So as blood passes through the hypothalamus before reaching anterior pituitary, there will be specific releasing and inhibitory hormones, which I have already explained. Growth hormone releasing, growth hormone inhibiting, same way, are secreted into blood. Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So these hormones are then transported via blood to anterior pituitary gland, where they act on the glandular cells. So you have studied the glandular cells of the anterior pituitary. There they will act to control the release of specific anterior pituitary hormones. So that was about the anterior pituitary gland controlled by the hypothalamus. Next is control of the posterior pituitary gland and its hormones by the hypothalamus. So you all know that hypothalamus, there are two important hormones which are produced, which go and gets released into the posterior pituitary from where the actual release will take place. Those are the oxytocin and ADH. Both are nanopeptides. So regulates formation and release of oxytocin and ADH. Oxytocin has got many functions like neuroendocrine reflexes. Two examples are milk ejection reflex and one more is parturition reflex. Since both the neural component as well as the hormonal component is involved, these two are the examples for neuroendocrine reflexes. Second is antidiuretic hormone. The applied aspects being diabetes insipidus, where too much of water is excreted, and SIADH, syndrome of inappropriate antidiuretic hormone secretion. That is, more and more ADH will be secreted in this particular syndrome. So hypothalamus controls the release of these two hormones. Regulation of uterine contractility and milk ejection from breasts by the hypothalamus. So there is, you all know, paraventricular nuclei are the nuclei which helps in release of the hormone oxytocin. This hormone will act by increasing the contractility of the uterus, especially during the childbirth. As well as one more function is it will cause contraction of the myoepithelial cells which are present around the alveoli of the breasts, which then causes the alveoli to empty the milk through the nipples. That milk ejection reflex or milk let down reflex, they would have taught you in the reproductive system. So at the end of pregnancy, especially during parturition or childbirth, large amounts of oxytocin is secreted. This helps to promote labor contractions, which helps in normal delivery. So this milk ejection reflex or milk let down reflex already explained in reproductive system. Just a brief about that. So when baby suckles the mother's breast, a signal will go from nipple to the posterior hypothalamus that will cause the release of oxytocin. Oxytocin, what it will do is it will contract the myoepithelial cells which are surrounding the alveoli of the breast. Thereby, the milk will be expelled out through the nipples so that the baby can nourish itself. So this oxytocin is secreted in the paraventricular nuclei of the hypothalamus. Okay, coming to one more function of hypothalamus, role of hypothalamus in regulating body temperature. Anterior hypothalamus, especially one particular area which is involved in body temperature regulation, is the preoptic area. Increase in temperature of blood flowing through this preoptic area, what it will do is, it will increase the activity of temperature sensitive neurons will be there in the preoptic area. So when the blood flow which is flowing through that region, when the temperature of that blood increases, that area will get activated. If the temperature of that blood decreases, that preoptic area will get inhibited, like that. So these neurons control mechanisms for increasing and decreasing the body temperature. So how it will do? Regulation of body temperature, thermostat function. So there is a separate topic on body temperature regulation, but the role of hypothalamus in body temperature regulation can also be asked for 5 marks. So what they have found out is lateral hypothalamus is the area which is mainly concerned with increasing body temperature. Anterior hypothalamus is the area which is mainly concerned with decreasing body temperature. So we all know whenever there is extreme cold, the changes happening is, first thing is vasoconstriction. Second thing is shivering. So whenever there is shivering, the muscles get contracted. So as a result of this, body temperature will increase. Next area is when there is decreased body temperature. Sorry, when there is increased body temperature, what will happen? Anterior hypothalamus will send signals and there will be cutaneous vasodilatation. If there is cutaneous vasodilatation, more blood flow will be there to the skin. More blood flow to the skin, more will be the exposure of blood to the surrounding environment so that the heat is dissipated out of the body. And one more mechanism is sweating. So these two changes happen in increased temperature, mainly under the control of anterior hypothalamus. So that was temperature was the 5th function. 6th function being how the hypothalamus controls the autonomic functions. They have found out that anterior hypothalamus is responsible for parasympathetic effects and lateral hypothalamus is responsible for sympathetic effects. Other areas which are also concerned with autonomic functions are mid-dorsal area, which has got cholinergic sympathetic vasodilatation, and posterior and dorsomedial nucleus, which produce increased catecholamine release. Catecholamine release will also again produce the sympathetic effects. So you all know anterior hypothalamus parasympathetic effects, meaning there will be decrease in the heart rate, decrease in the force of contraction, all those effects can be seen. Lateral hypothalamus will have the opposite effects. It is increased heart rate, increased force of contraction. So you all know positive inotropic effect, chronotropic effect, bathmotropic effect, and dromotropic effect will be seen when there is activation of sympathetic center. Coming to 7th function, role of hypothalamus in sleep and wakefulness. So that day I was explaining through the suprachiasmatic nuclei of hypothalamus. Hypothalamus controls the sleep and wakefulness. Suppose during daytime, the signals will pass through the eye. It will go to the retina. From retina, it will go to the hypothalamus, retinohypothalamic fibers. And then it will sense it as daylight. Then there will be decreased production of one hormone that is called melatonin. Whereas in night, what will happen is the impulses going from the eye, the light impulses going from the eye will be blocked because of darkness. So the pineal gland will secrete more of melatonin, and that's how this sleep and wake cycle will be controlled, mainly through the suprachiasmatic nucleus of hypothalamus. So they have found out that posterior hypothalamus, which is a part of reticular activating system. You know, reticular activating system is mainly controlling the wakefulness. So this posterior hypothalamus, which is a part of ascending reticular activating system, is responsible for wakefulness. Whereas anterior hypothalamus produces electrical changes in the brain that will be similar to sleep. That is the EEG waves when you take. So the brain waves, it will look similar to sleep waves on stimulation of the anterior hypothalamus. Coming to next function of hypothalamus, control of circadian rhythm. Circadian rhythm is nothing but it's like diurnal variations, meaning some hormones. For example, I'm telling growth hormone, which will be produced more at 8 o'clock in the morning, and it may be secreted in less amounts in the evening, like that. Each hormone or each function, it will vary according to day and night cycle. That is called diurnal variations. For example, body temperature, it can be high during the evening and low during the morning. Those changes which are happening throughout the day, a particular time it is increasing, particular time it is increasing. Those are called diurnal variations. The other name given to that is called circadian rhythm. The nucleus which is mainly concerned with circadian rhythm is the ventromedial nucleus of hypothalamus. So it controls circadian rhythm or diurnal variations like growth hormone, melatonin. You know, melatonin is secreted more during the night time, during sleep. So that is again a diurnal variation. And during waking state or in the mornings, the levels will be low. Similarly, gonadotropin will be secreted more during certain parts of the day and less during some other part. ACTH secretion, body temperature, same way the BP, when you check in the morning, it may be slightly different when you check in the evening. So some variations will be there. Those are called diurnal variations. So for these things also, hypothalamus is a control and the nucleus involved is ventromedial nucleus. All these circadian rhythm, it is our hypothalamus is like a biological clock. So what the tell is hypothalamus acts like a biological clock which is internally driven. Just the input will goes from eyes. The light input will go from eyes. In the darkness, the inputs will not go. Absence of input. So that will help the hypothalamus to recognize, okay, which part of the day. So based on that, the hormone secretion or the body temperature, everything will change. That is called circadian rhythm. Internally driven, they need input from eyes and lateral geniculate body, mainly to synchronize with the light and dark cycle. So for this circadian rhythm to happen, I told you, the input will go from retina and it will go to the suprachiasmatic nucleus directly. And then from suprachiasmatic nucleus, a poorly defined projections will go to the pineal gland. Pineal gland is the gland which produces the hormone melatonin. So during day, when the signals are going from retina to suprachiasmatic nucleus, the pineal gland will stop producing or it will produce melatonin in very less quantity. Whereas during the darkness, the light impulses are not going to the suprachiasmatic nucleus, then what will happen is the pineal gland will receive signals and it will start producing more and more melatonin. So continuing with the functions of hypothalamus, the next function is role of hypothalamus in controlling emotion, in controlling behavior. So in the limbic system is the one which is mainly concerned with emotions of a person and behavior control of a person, the way a person behaves and the way the person is having emotions like happiness, sadness, anger, everything. So for all these components, the limbic system is the one which will help in controlling the emotions or showing different emotions and how the person behaves in different circumstances. In the limbic system, the main part, one of the main component of limbic system is hypothalamus. So hypothalamus will help the limbic system in controlling emotions and behavior. So what they have found, there are two types of nucleus, lateral hypothalamic nucleus and ventromedial nucleus. Both have got exactly opposite functions. When you stimulate the lateral hypothalamus of a person, what the animal or a person will observe is there will be fright and flight reactions, and one more is increases libido. On the other hand, when you stimulate the ventromedial hypothalamus, there will be avoidance reactions and reduces libido. So these are the two areas of hypothalamus which are involved in controlling emotions and behavior. Lateral produces fright and flight reactions, increasing libido. Ventromedial produces avoidance reactions and reduces libido. Next and the last function of the hypothalamus is the integrated control of cardiovascular system. So stimulation of different areas through the hypothalamus can cause every known type of neurogenic effect on the cardiovascular system. So if you go on stimulating different areas of hypothalamus which are controlling the cardiovascular center, you will be seeing different effects. One is some areas if you stimulate, you may observe increased arterial pressure. Some other areas you stimulate, you may observe decreased arterial pressure. Similarly, some areas can increase the heart rate and some other areas can decrease the heart rate. So this is how different areas of hypothalamus controls the cardiovascular system. So which are the areas which are concerned with the cardiovascular system regulation? Stimulation of lateral posterior, what they have found is it is going to increase the heart rate and BP. So that will act like a sympathetic center, posterior and lateral hypothalamus. On the other hand, if you stimulate the preoptic area, it will act like a parasympathetic area. So it has got opposite functions. That is decreasing the heart rate and decreasing the blood pressure. So how the hypothalamus will bring about these effects are mainly through specific cardiovascular control centers. So you all know in the medulla and pons there will be vasomotor center, cardiac inhibitory center, all those things. Through these areas, hypothalamus will bring about the integrated control of cardiovascular system functions. So once again, I will just tell me the overall functions of hypothalamus. So first is controlling the food intake. Next is regulating the water balance. Third is regulating the body temperature. Next is controlling the anterior pituitary gland. Next, controlling posterior pituitary gland. regulation of autonomic functions, controlling the sleep and wakefulness cycle, controlling the circadian rhythm, controlling the emotions and behavior, mainly because it is associated with limbic system. Last is integrated control of cardiovascular system. So these are the 10 important functions of hypothalamus. So that will end the connections and functions of hypothalamus. And totally the hypothalamus topic is over. Okay. Thank you everybody. Happy learning.